Here we go.
Cool.
Okay, so what's your name, your role, and where do you live?
Yeah, my name is Dave Zimmerman. I am the publisher at Nav Press. We're the publisher of the Message Bible, and I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for making some time today. I wanted to get this story behind the Bible translation called The Message by Eugene Peterson. So, you're the publisher at Nav Press, and for those who don't know, Nav Press published The Message. I don't know how many years ago it was, but it was a while ago. So, I just wanted to ask,
Yeah.
what year was it?
So we published the New Testament in 1993. So we just had our 30th anniversary of the New Testament, and we completed the Bible with Eugene in 2002. So we're 22 years into the full Bible. Uh, so I
I
think that
remember.
math is right.
Yeah, and I remember when it first came out, I was
Yeah,
well, in the early years, I remember that it was kind of like, "Oh, the message. It's not a translation, it's a paraphrase." You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
And I think
yeah,
people were kind of like, "I don't know about this." One guy did it. And honestly, for decades, well, it's only been a couple. For the first solid decade, I was like, "I will
yeah.
not use this." Like somehow I just had it in my mind that evangelicals
Yeah,
or like really serious students of the word should not use it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that, it wasn't even a question for me. It was just like, oh, yeah, we don't do the message. And then I started hearing
yeah.
people quote from it. You know what I'm saying? And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, maybe I respect those people. So maybe I should give it a shot. And then I heard people I really respected really using it often without a question. And I was like, okay, so there's merit here. And then I learned, and here was the linchpin for me. Here was the crux for me. I learned that Eugene Peterson is legit. He got degrees in ancient Near East languages, and um, and when I learned Greek and Hebrew, I would go to the message and I would kind of compare, and I was like, oh, that's actually really helpful. But I'd say what really did it for me was I learned that Bono didn't connect with the scriptures until the message. And I thought, man, there's really something here. And then when I learned the story behind why Eugene wrote the message, I thought, man, this is beautiful. So let me stop talking and
Yeah,
just kind of let you tell me. I want to know what's your heart about the message and your involvement with this paraphrase.
yeah, yeah. So, real quick, a story about Bono, just because I like to say that I have stories about Bono, is that it was shortly after I came to Nav Press, actually. And I was part of my portfolio when I first joined Nav Press was the message, but this was a rights issue, so I wasn't directly involved in it. But the U2 was about to go on tour. I forget which record. It would have been the mid teens for U2. But they decided that they wanted, as part of their tour, to at the end of their shows to launch a giant volume of confetti into the stadium, and printed on the confetti were verses from the Psalms in the message. So we had to figure out, okay, how do we write permission? I don't think we've ever previously had a permission request for confetti cannon.
That involves confetti, right?
Confetti cannon fodder release form did not at that point exist. But so yeah, really early on, for whatever reason, yeah, Bono has been a real lover and friend of the message over the years, and a student of Eugene's. And the funny story from Eugene is that someone reached out to him and said, Bono would like a meeting with you. And he said, great, who's Bono? And he kept putting off the sit down with Bono. And someone asked him, why would you put off Bono? And he said, I was translating Isaiah. And the interviewer said, but it's Bono. And he said, but it's Isaiah. And so Eugene did this work out of love, right? He had a
Yeah.
love for the scriptures, and you're right. He loved it in the original language. He did his personal devotions from untranslated texts of the scriptures, and but he was a working pastor, and he saw this challenge, and he writes about this in the introductory material for the message, that he moved from teaching ancient Near Eastern languages into a pastoral role. And he has a good line that he found that what he had just recently been paid to do, to teach the biblical languages, now he couldn't get any traction in this congregation. People were either over familiar with the scriptures and so they were bored by it, or they were intimidated by the scriptures and they just kept the scriptures at arm's length. And so this pastoral work of drawing people into a life with Christ, and drawing people into walking in the way of Christ was kind of undermined by this sort of two-flanked indifference to the scriptures. And he had to figure out how to bring he talks about the two language worlds, the language of the Bible and the language of today, and bringing those two language worlds together was the task. And at first it was a pastoral task, and he started with Galatians, and he did a Sunday school class on the book of Galatians, and teaching his congregation about living in freedom, right? Freedom from sin. We no longer are slaves to sin, but also freedom from the law, that we're not called to pious performance, but we're called to a life of union with God in Christ, and a life of obedience to Christ, led by the Spirit, not enslavement to the law. And he started in like the RSV, I think, and people were not feeling it, and he talked to his wife, and his wife said, well, he talked to his wife about sort of what he was seeing in the original text, and he said, well, I can't read it to them in Greek, right? And she said, no, but you can talk about it the way you've been talking to me about it. And so he translated the book of Galatians as he was going through this Sunday school class, and he saw this transformation of interest, and the scriptures came alive for the people he was working with, and he thought, I'm on to something. And prepping for this conversation, I saw that relationship was a guiding principle for Eugene as he entered the work of translation. That relationship would be a value, that people would feel connected to the text as they read through it. And so it's very idiomatic, as you know, and it's quaint, and it's interesting. It's difficult to translate the message into other languages because it's so idiomatic.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah.
it's a translation of a translation, and that's just not
Right.
good.
It's hyper contextualized, right? But that's intentional. That the gospel is good news to people where they are, and at the point that they encounter it. And so the language of the scriptures, Eugene's goal was to render the scriptures in a way that meet people where they are, um, in a contextually meaningful, resonant way.
I love the fact that he did it not to publish. My understanding is he did it not to
Right.
publish the book. He did it out of the
Right.
exigency of his local congregation, which was kind of in the middle of nowhere, British Columbia, if I remember right.
Well, no, his local congregation was in the Baltimore area, but
Okay,
kind
wrong
of a
coast.
small Presbyterian church. Yeah, and a real kind of working class Baltimore congregation. So
And pretty small too, right? Like the congregation was not large.
yeah, I don't think it was. I don't think it was large, and that's how he likes it. Eugene is a like intensely local guy. Like where he is significant. So
Okay, so here's what I really am curious about.
yeah,
What was your role with the message?
yeah. So I'm a latecomer, right? I joined Nav Press in 2014. Eugene died in 2018, I think. Um, and one of my tasks coming on at Nav Press was to oversee what I like to call kind of an aesthetic update. We asked a couple of people from the original translation committee. We had advisors. The original work had a translation committee of advisors from a variety of seminaries and colleges with backgrounds in biblical languages and biblical theology. So we asked Tremper Longman to like renew his role as Old Testament consultant and and Bill Klein as the New Testament consultant. And then we worked with a couple of uh, authors slash poets to just go through and see what could stand a light refresh, right? We wanted to sort of keep it weird enough to like jar people out of that over familiarity, um, quirky enough to honor that or accommodate that intimidation factor that other readers feel. And so we worked with John Blaze, who's a former pastor, writer, poet. He's an editor and agent. Um, and then Anne Voskamp. We asked her; she's a fan of the message, and so John and Anne kind of divvied up the scriptures, taking first passes and then comparing notes on what they were thinking. Like, let's protect the kind of aesthetic integrity of the message, but look for places where we can give it a light refresh. And then we'd send their recommendations to Eugene. He would weigh in and make sure we wanted to make sure that he was comfortable with what we were doing with it. And then we also had Bill and Tremper can speak in to make sure that we weren't that what John and Anne were recommending aesthetically kept continuity with translation values from the original project.
Wow.
So it was
So
pretty fun. That was and for me as an editor, that was like the highlight of my career, right? Like you get like inside the scriptures, asking those kind of translation value questions and like why did Eugene do this and what's temporal and what's eternal, right? Like in a translation process, and how do we honor the history of the project, revere and keep sacred the word of God as rendered in the project, and yeah, and serve the reading audience, which was Eugene's goal for the project originally. I think it's a particularly missional Bible by virtue of its origin story, right? Like it had this kind of very local, very direct interface at the beginning. Um, and it grew out of that, and we want to kind of protect the integrity of that. So that's kind of how I got my feet wet with the with the message.
Yeah. And you said it was a highlight of your career. I mean,
Yeah.
how did how did it feel? I mean, okay, so just for clarification, were you going
Yeah.
back and forth with Eugene in 2014 and the years? Like, how long was
Yeah,
that
I think
project?
yeah, I think we started that project in earnest in 2016. And so it was probably about a year to button everything up. And we did it in batches, just to accommodate, Anne and John's availability. And Eugene was he was retired, so he was pretty flexible, but he didn't want to be bugged.
Yeah, I mean, that's
It,
incredible
yeah.
that you guys got it in before he died. And and those revisions were, from what you were saying, helpful and needed. You know, you said it was a highlight of your career. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, for one thing, I'd been a fan of the message long before coming to Nav Press. I had never worked in Bible publishing prior to Nav Press, so just the distinct work of Bible publishing was new for me. And there are a lot of just different dynamics involved in Bible publishing. I like to say that if you're in the Bible publishing business, you're in the scripture engagement business, and so you have to think about you know the the ways you develop products. You're thinking about, okay, the end game of this product is to draw people deeper into the scriptures. And Eugene originally conceived of the message as a reading Bible. The first line of his preface or of his introduction is reading is the first thing, just reading the Bible. And he says there will be time to study later on, and there are great Bibles for study, but the first goal of the scriptures is to be read, and so that's kind of the task of our publishing. So I was a fan of the message before I got here, and when I got here. No, let me back up. When I before I worked for a publishing house that had a Bible, I looked at um, publishing houses that had a Bible, and I thought, well, uh, what's the what's the distinguishing factor of that, right? Because it's a big undertaking, and it's actually a pretty significant risk for a publisher to take on a Bible and to do it well. It can overwhelm the overall publishing program, um, but it also
Right,
eventually
because it's
comes
not
to
just
undergird.
someone else's book; it's the book. So
Right,
that's
right,
kind of
and
a bold move.
yeah, and a typical book takes 18 months to produce. A Bible takes 3 years to produce. They're generally printed overseas. There's a lot of logistical complexity to creating Bibles, so it really needs its own infrastructure. So it's a big undertaking, but it comes to undergird the publishing program. And I looked around, and you think, when you think of Crossway, the first thing you think of is the ESV, right? And when you think of Zondervan, the first thing you think of is the NIV, and that's it's similar with with Tyndale House, the NLT is kind of your first thought, right? And I started to think, well, in what ways do those Bibles come to not just define the brand, but define the ethos, right? And so it got exciting to me when I came to Nav Press to think, okay, well, in what ways um, does the message or could the message start to like inform and even define the ethos of NavPress publishing generally? And we're helped because the message was an undertaking by Eugene, right? And so we're not just talking about a translation um, that involved a translation committee. We're talking about a translation ethos that was informed by a pastoral ethos, and so I thought so it was really exciting to me to think that like this idea of bringing the scriptures into an encounter with people where they live and work and play and study
It's
and pray
perfect.
and
It's perfect
yeah,
for Nav Press because Nav Press's ethos from the beginning has been to equip people for discipleship.
right.
And so
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
really cool way to
yeah,
frame it, to think about Crossway and Zondervan, with the ESV, the NIV, and even Tyndale. Those really do represent
yeah.
the kind of flavor of that publisher. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to get in a room with like the Bible team members from all those places and just say like, what do you and test this theory with them, you know? They might be like, okay, calm down, but but I like the idea of it. And it's been helpful for me as I've thought about where are we going with NavPress and thinking we've got this kind of like ground beneath us that can kind of steady us, you know, and keep us tethered to the scriptures and tethered to a way of engaging the scriptures um,
Yeah.
that
It's almost
can
like
be helpful to our authors. Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead.
and I'm sure it's been great to financially for Nav Press to have that, because it's a big risk and a big undertaking, yes, but it's also
Mhm.
a really great potential reward, if it goes well, and if it's accepted and the message has been so, you know popular around the, well, I guess at least in the English speaking world. Um,
Yeah,
what was the moment where, so you came on in 2014 and they're like, okay, you've got the message. What was the moment like
yeah.
when, how did you, yeah, what was that moment when you got that message and how did it feel?
Yeah. You mean when it became like my project or
Yeah,
what?
like
Yeah.
who told you? Where were you? Like, was it like one of those like,
Mm.
oh my goodness, what was that like?
Yeah, it was an interesting time because I came on, I was kind of the last hire of a new generation for Nav Press. We had gone from we had this is an oversimplification, but we had sort of outsourced everything on the back end of our publishing process and became entirely editorially focused. And I was the last hire of that new era, and I came in and we had gone through a few kind of production meetings and editorial meetings, and I think a couple of us thought, like no one, the message isn't in any of our job descriptions. So, what are we going to do about the message, right?
So let me get
And
this
I
right.
raised my hand. I would like I'll take that on because that sounded thrilling. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so
Go
you
ahead.
volunteered for it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
raised your hand.
because yeah, it's I mean, it's a big undertaking, but it's, you know, it is like you said, it's becomes kind of the anchor of your whole publishing program.
Let me get this
And
right. Okay, so NavPress had scaled back, like previous to you,
yeah.
and then you were the last hire of like an editorial sort of ethos, and then
We went from around 60 people covering the whole publishing process to 6 people focused in on editorial. So yeah. Are you getting background noise here?
no, I'm not.
Are Okay. Okay.
No, you're good.
Good.
So, okay,
There's
so
some
you
people
raised your
catching up
hand.
outside my door.
Oh no, you're fine. So you raised your
Yeah.
hand. You're like, can I take this on? Okay, you can pick up from
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So not too long after that, we scheduled kind of a summit with some folks who had some background in Bible publishing. And that was a really helpful meeting for me personally, and I think us as a team to think about what are we going to do with this trust that's been handed down to us, right? And I remember one of the things that his name's Doug Knox. He's now retired, legend in Christian publishing. Worked on the NLT for a long time. And he said, a good question for Bible publishing is what can your Bible do that only your Bible can do, right? And the message is pretty distinct from anything else in the market, right? Like you say, it's Eugene worked from the original languages, so it's a translation, but it didn't follow a translation process in the way that other translations followed. So it's also a paraphrase, right? So it's a translated paraphrase or a paraphrased translation. So it's weird from the jump, right?
Right. Yeah.
And and uh and like what does that kind of uniqueness make possible? What does it make impossible, right? Like where are the places that we can't go and we should like um refer Bible readers to other good Bibles and good Bible translations. It's not a word for word literal translation. So people who are looking to do really careful word study, we would want to refer them to something like the NASB or something like that. But for that kind of like people who are on their way in and people who are on their way out, kind of the people who are sort of checked out from scripture engagement or the people who are like um scared to enter, the field's pretty wide open there. So it's been fun to move into kind of product development with that in mind, to think about kind of the thin spaces that this particular kind of uh, translation effort makes available to the reader, right? Like if the scriptures are a place of encounter with the living God, then what does this kind of rendering of the scriptures afford a reader for how does the message become holy ground for our readers? That's a fun uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I
development.
think it's interesting to think about the place of the message in the church, because it's so unique. And I often think that the origin story of anything helps you understand its purpose ultimately.
Yeah.
And so finding out the origin story of the message or any other book is helpful because then you understand, okay, what was the intention of the author? And obviously God is the author of the scriptures, but the translation is an extension, an incarnation, so to speak, of that contextualized rendering of the eternal word. Um, so I think it really is interesting. It's helpful to know the background story. So to go back to what we were talking about the re-up in like 2014,
Yeah.
15, 16. What was the motive there? And did it was it wrapped up, and is there like a copyright stamp for the new one? Because I didn't even know about that. I thought it was just one and done. When did that come out and all
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Well, we did copyright it. So let me find it in here. Yeah, it's just added to the copyright. 2018 was the re-up. And it's really light. We opted not to really publicize it as like a new edition or anything because
Right.
we didn't want to um we were worried that it would suggest to people something that we didn't intend to suggest. We
So
really
what
wanted
was it
it to
exactly that you guys updated? I mean, like if you were looking at percentage of words that was changed, was it like 1%? Or was it
it
like
was
10?
I would put it closer to 10, maybe a little over 10, but not by much. And and yeah, and it was very kind of localized. So John and Anne would um, each of them would sort of pick a book and then they would read through the book and they would say, this kind of falls odd on our ears today, right? This worked in
Oh,
1993, but it doesn't feel
interesting.
like it's working now. It's really the a particular challenge for the message, right? We have this kind of tagline as the Bible in contemporary language, and the problem with contemporary. Do you know this bit from G.K. Chesterton? He says
No.
the thing about um, the thing about modernity is it's always in the process of dying, right? Right. So like what's current and what's contemporary is always has a shelf life and it's a short shelf life. So we make this promise of contemporary language, but and I think especially in starting in the mid 2000s, we did this. We started a product line, and this was before I came, but we started a product line with an emphasis on young people, like youth groups and that sort of thing, called the Remix. And that was the point at which we brought in a numbering system in the earliest publications of the message. There was only chapter uh, demarcations. There weren't any versification. And you probably
Really?
know this, but
Okay,
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
know that.
And this was Eugene's idea, right? The Bible is a thing to be read, and you risk losing the cadence of the whole text of the Bible when you cut it up into verses. And so he wanted to approach it as a book by book consideration, not a verse by verse consideration. And so you see that today. We went for a numbered edition, um, basically
Like when you
because
say numbered, do you mean verse numbered?
yeah, versification added, because it was creating some like usage problems for some of the ways the Bible was being used. So enough people were kind of struggling with it without verses. But the problem is that Eugene translated paragraphs, not verses, right? So you
Oh,
look in,
interesting.
you,
I have noticed that because
yeah,
sometimes I'll be like, I have in accordance software, I've got it all lined up, and I'm
yeah,
like that's not even the thing. That makes
right,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
My wife likes to do this to me every now, like when we're driving to church, she'll say, "Here's the verse of the day," uh, uh, from in the U version, right? And so she'll start in the NIV, and it's like one sentence, and then she'll go to the King James, and it's one sentence, and then she'll go to the Message, and it's 12 sentences, right? Because of the versification, you can't sort of pull out the line. You have to read the line in context. Um, but anyway, in the mid 2000s, we started the remix, trying to make the Message optimized for youth group use, and it started to pick up this youth flavor, which is interesting because it's written at
So
a
the remix
higher. It's
is basically like an an addition of the translation for youth.
right,
Okay,
right. So you see some of the front and back matter features are different,
but I
and
mean the actual translation itself is it different?
Yeah, the translation itself didn't change.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's just kind of the template is different. Some of the supplemental features are different. Um, but uh, but a a big a big piece of Bible publishing is the fashion, right? Like how you package the Bible.
Oh man,
And
yeah.
so
And by the
the
way, I think y'all's branding is great. I also love the ESV branding. I'm like,
oh,
I have this goat skin one. Um, I don't.
you got one of the goat skinned.
Well, it
Wow.
was my seminary graduation present. If you're gonna
I
get a
was going to
present for
say that must
graduating
have been a
seminary
special occasion.
and it's bougie, then you can get the goat skin. Uh, so okay, so um, anyway, I digress.
No, no. Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I regret about the history of the message is the spillover effect of remix on the sort of general impression of the message, right? When you look at original endorsers of the message, it was people like J.I. Packer and like Lath Anderson and like these Max Lucado, like these kind of his like senior sages of evangelicalism, right? Like the senior leaders of the church, and they were engaging the message from that vantage point, right? This is written by a senior pastor with decades of pastoral experience, um, and uh, and it was conceived and understood in that sense, right? You've already mentioned kind of the sort of counterpoint, right? The pushback after the early wave of embrace of the message. But when the remix came around, it was marketed really heavily to youth groups and did really well and was really well received among youth groups. But that's when it started developing this kind of what I call it the reputation, right? You look at Babylon B like articles where they talk about uh, how the different Bible versions would plan a trip to the lake or something, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh, and the message, and this is because of it's kind of a byproduct of the success of the remix launch. The message is always like cap cocked to the side, Red Bull in hand, sunglasses, Vans, on the feet, and it has this like bro vibe to it that is just completely incompatible with who Eugene was and the approach that he took to the Bible. Eugene's a mountain man, right? Like he spent his retirement years on a lake in Kalispell, and um, like chopping wood and like fishing and stuff like that. And and he's a poet, right? So the reading level of the message is actually a little higher than other contemporary translations of the Bible. Um, and that's because Eugene wanted to bring the language forward, right? Bring these language worlds together, but he didn't want to make it easy on people because the scriptures are not easy, right? They challenge our assumptions, they confront our idolatries, so you look through our back catalogs and these fashions, uh, aimed at like high school students in 2008, and there's like zebra print covers and like bubble covers. They
Are
did
those
they
still in
did
print,
it.
man, or did you guys reprint the? You guys
I
reprint?
think we've killed off most of the like most garish editions, but there was, I think I've got it in here. Yeah. Um, there was a short run of lunch boxes with
Oh, that's incredible. I'm
yeah,
so glad to hear about that. Also, I'm embarrassed for you.
and the cover of the Bible is a thermos.
What? How does that even make sense?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It was the 2000s.
That's
Yeah, I
awesome.
wasn't here.
Yeah,
I'm
for the
sure they had
record.
the reasons. I respect the prior history of
I
NavPress.
mean, hey, as publishers, we're all trying to figure stuff out. So,
That's
I've kind of got a question for you. Okay, so I learned that with the NIV, I was talking to Ryan Pasder over at Zondervan. He was my editor with my dad and Jason Hauser's book Dedicated, and then I did some editing projects early with him in my business career, um, and and then one day, this is just I don't know, a handful of years ago, I was like, where is the NIV 1984? Because he works at Zondervan, so they've got the rights. And I was like, I don't get it. Where did it go? Why can't I find it? I want the goatskin NIV 1984 because I memorized all these passages in that. And now we've got the 2011 version. And so it's not exactly the same thing. You know what I'm saying?
yeah. Yo.
So I reached out to him and he explained something that was just so unknown to me, but it was really helpful as a publisher myself. And he said that there's a committee, and part of the I guess the bylaws of the NIV committee are that it will always be updated perpetually into the future.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering when it comes to, that a committee can, has a rolling roll call in a sense. You can have new scholars, but Eugene,
Yeah.
you know, in
Right.
2018, he went to be with the Lord. So where does that leave the legacy and the continual updating of the message? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah. We work really closely with Rick Christian was Eugene's agent, and Rick, Rick has scaled his representation back considerably. He kept a small handful of authors that he continued to work with, and one is the estate, is Eugene's estate, his literary estate, and that's because it's a passion project for Rick as much as it was a passion project for Eugene. And so we meet regularly with Rick just to talk about how the product line is going, what we're hoping to do, what we're where we're seeing the need, and so Rick is a good dialogue partner for us with those questions of where the message is headed. And Rick represents the family, but he doesn't stand between us and the family. We did two books with Eric. One is great, and you should read it as I was flipping through it as prep for this. It's called Letters to a Young Pastor. And he was writing these letters. Eugene was writing these letters to Eric when Eric was planting his church, and when Eugene was finishing his work on the message and starting his spiritual theology series with Erdman's. Um, and so Eric has become a really good conversation partner for us as well. Um, there's the Eugene Peterson Center at Western Theological Seminary in Michigan, and we keep in good dialogue with those folks. Going forward, I think we kind of keep a running tab of passages that might merit a second look at some point if we go through another revision process. At that point, we'll figure out what the tipping point would be, and then we would probably at that point recruit um, new Bible scholars to serve as kind of an advisory committee for that process, since most of the folks on the original team are retired now, and and Eugene's no longer with us. So we would work with the family and with an advisory committee to make decisions. But I think we would continue to approach it principally as an aesthetic choice. That primary value for Eugene, that relational value that people should be connected to the scriptures, and so like how does how do the language choices in the message um, serve that connection? So
Yeah, man, that's
yeah,
really interesting. Um,
yeah.
I, I appreciate you sharing the story. Is there anything else you want to add about your role or the kind of the origin of the story behind the book?
Uh, hmm. Yeah, that nothing's kind of springing to mind. I'll just kind of reiterate. Well, here I guess is what I'll say. Um, this was something that Eugene dabbled in for a long time, and so he tried his hand in that local context. Translating Galatians for his Sunday school class. I think he did he tried some translations of the Psalms for like Christianity Today, maybe some other outlets. Um, and then he did his Traveling Light was a book that included his translation of Galatians. He did the Psalms of Ascent and Long Obedience in the same direction. He did portions of Jeremiah in his book Run with the Horses. Somewhere along
So
the way,
for those listeners
oh
who
yeah,
don't know, those all those books were published before he finished the message. Is that right?
yeah, those were yeah steps along the path. And somewhere along the way, an editor here at Nav Press, I got to meet him about a decade ago, and we haven't had much occasion to connect since then. But brilliant editor, and he just wrote Eugene a letter and said, "Have you ever thought about doing the whole New Testament?" Um, and Eugene was like, "Well, that would never work." But and there's video of Eugene reflecting on this, and it's the videos are great. A lot they're kind of archived at messagebible.com. They're worth checking out just because Eugene is so endearing in and of himself. But he said that would never work. And then he thought, well, if I could do the Beatitudes, um, that would be a good test case whether I could pull it off or not.
Oh,
So that was
interesting.
his kind of stress test
Why
of
was
the
that?
of the big idea. I think because they're well, I don't know.
I mean, they are
Eugene,
notoriously kind of nuanced, but that's interesting. It's almost like
yeah,
the
I
most
think
precious.
yeah, and it's Jesus the pastor, right? It's the Sermon on the Mount. So sermons are crafted particularly, and can you do right by it, and how much damage would you do to this like self-contained, intricate sermon
Yeah.
by trying,
Okay,
message
so
it up?
that was the test case, and then I guess it worked. Like, what happened next?
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting. Facebook gives you these kind of uh, what you posted, 10 years ago or something, and I was looking through that just the other day, and I was quoting uh, the Beatitudes from the message, just because they're really lovely. They're so different from renderings and other Bible translations, um, that they do what the intent is to do, right? To sort of stop you, to interrupt your over familiarity like draw in people who feel daunted by what they see in more word literal translations. Um, and I was posting these, 15 years ago, long before I came to Nav Press, um, just because they were proving so resonant to me. Um, and I think uh, you know, I am a I'm a devotee of the message, right? like
I
like
love that you ended up getting it
I
in
drank the
order to.
Kool-Aid, yeah, like a good decade before I showed up at the door of this place. And it's not for everyone. It is very particular, and it has kind of, it hits its kind of ceiling of utility for, like, it's not terribly serviceable for deep, robust Bible study, and
Right.
Eugene
Yeah.
like acknowledges that right at the outset. Um, but as a way of drawing near to God by drawing into the scriptures, um, it's uh like, I'm sold, man. It works, and it worked on me. So I love it.
Okay, so back to the story that you were saying.
Oh
Use it
yeah,
as
I
a
was
test
telling a
case.
story, wasn't I?
Yeah, yeah. No, I just wanted to hear the rest of it. So he used it as a test case, and then what happened next?
Yeah, so he decided it worked, and so he thought, well, I'll keep going into it. And at some point, and Win Collier, who runs the Peterson Center in Michigan, this he goes into some detail on this in his biography of Eugene. But at some point, he got connected to Rick, his who became his agent. And Eugene is so kind of off the grid as a personality. Rick talks about how it was one of his weirdest author calls, because Rick was trying to sort of find the point of connection, and Eugene was giving him nothing, right? So Rick was like, "Yeah, you remind me a little bit of Wendell Berry," and Eugene said, "Oh yeah, yeah, Wendell Berry's great," and then nothing, right? And so Eugene said, yeah, and there are these other contemporary writers who I think your work is nice and compatible with. And he said, "Oh yes, those are good writers," and then nothing. And
Just real humble.
and yeah, yeah, and just like not interested in the game, So, but he was being approached by Nav Press about doing this as a full New Testament and potentially a full Bible. And there were other publishers who were starting to get interested as well. And so Eugene was getting these calls that were overwhelming to him. So he said, "Well, someone's got to kind of figure this out for me." And so Rick was uniquely gifted in negotiating and navigating the complexity of that conversation. And even though I think this is true, that NavPress was not um, was not the most competitive offer on the table, and was didn't have the kind of footing that the other kind of publishers who had expressed interest had in the marketplace. So Nav Press was a risk for Eugene and for Rick, but that initial conversation or that initial letter that John Stein sent to him, that um, was not characterized by hustle. It wasn't the kind of like, well, we've been around the block, right? When a
Yeah.
publisher is working an author, or when an author is working a publisher, like the primal conversation that yielded the message was a lover of the word connecting with a lover of the word over a shared love of words, right?
A
And
heart
so,
level connection kindred
Yeah.
spirits. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
how did Eugene and Rick make the decision at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think Rick wanted to defer to Eugene, and Eugene, and this is secondhand for me, there are other people who can speak more directly to this experience, but I think some of the publishers who were interested in doing the message had not really it had not really registered with them how averse um, to the game Eugene was, and so their pitch to Eugene was um, game focused, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I like how you said
very
that.
kind of yeah, very yeah, not I mean, not transactional, but commercial, I think, was what other publishers were the footing that other publishers were like taking.
Yeah, Eugene just
And
wasn't playing that same game. It's not necessarily a bad game. It's just that wasn't what he was
right,
looking for. And so,
right, yeah. And I think when it's your passion project, when it's your life's work, when you're dealing deeply with sacred texts, your your
you're not in it for
decision
the money.
matrix.
Let's just put it that
Yeah, you're
way.
yeah, you're gonna make decisions based on different values. And I think, that uh NavPress had to earn the trust, that we could, because Bible publishing is such a massive undertaking. NavPress had to prove that we could do it, right? That this wasn't going to um, like break down before it even saw the light of day. Uh, and But so NavPress made a formal pitch that involved sort of marketplace considerations, but um, behind it and prior to it was this prior connection that this is a Bible that can distinctly and uniquely inform people's discipleship who might otherwise um, keep a relationship with God, and obedience to Christ, and responsiveness to the Spirit at arm's length, right?
Yeah,
And this is a Bible that can bridge that gap in a way that other really good Bibles, might not be able to. And I think that prior connection is what really won the day for NavPress as the publisher of the
that's
message.
really
And
interesting. Yeah,
we take that seriously. We like that's part of our heritage, and that's part of our responsibility. That's part of our stewardship going forward. So, especially now that
yeah,
Eugene is no longer with us.
yeah. That's awesome, man. To hear from you, you're the publisher at Nav Press.
Hmm.
In a sense, you're kind of the go-to person for the message at this point. Obviously, you've got
Okay.
a board, I would guess, and everything. But as far as the day to day, and so
Yeah.
you're handling that IP now, which is an
Yeah.
incredible legacy for you to. It sounds like you feel the weight and the gravitas of that intellectual property, and you want to honor
Yeah.
it. You've got a heart for it. So, um,
Yeah.
who? Let me just wrap up by asking who would you recommend I talk to? Like, is John still around? Is Rick around? Who else would you recommend me talking to?
Yeah, Rick would be really good to talk to. And John would be good to talk to. He's a bit of a recluse. That's been my experience of him. Another editor who was pretty involved in the message at the outset. Don Simpson just died last month. He would have been good. I mean, we're just at that point, right? Where there's a sort of generational shift
Yeah.
taking place in evangelical publishing. So, but Rick would be good. John would be good. Win Collier would be really
Hmm.
good. Eric Peterson would be really good.
And Eric
There
is
might be
his
some.
son?
Eric's his son. Yeah,
Okay.
he has two sons and a daughter. But Eric is so Eugene dedicated his book on Jeremiah, Run with the Horses, to Eric. Um, uh, and the dedication is cute. It says to Eric, also the son of a priest, because Jeremiah is introduced as the son of a priest right at the beginning of the book. So yeah, and Eric's done a lot of kind of reflecting on Eugene's pastoral legacy as well as his literary legacy. So yeah, he'd be a good conversation partner for you.
Well, man, if you're willing to connect me with those people, that'd be great.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking uh there's this there's this book that came out last month. I haven't seen it yet, but a guy who was kind of behind it for the last 4 years. I wonder if you know him. No, you probably don't because I know him through Ace. But his name's Roy Carlisle, and he was the editor of A Celebration of Discipline when that came out. And the reason I bring it up is because Roy has just published uh, the book biography of A Celebration of Discipline. And he told us about book biographies several years ago, and it strikes me that what you're doing with this podcast series is kind of similar to in a different medium, and so it
How does
requires a
he do?
different
Is he
kind of
writing the
focus.
book biographies?
So this is a sort of relatively new genre, and I think there's one published on the King James version of the Bible. I think that might have been one of the early book biographies, but he didn't write it, but he was like an editorial consultant on it, and it tends to be kind of scholarly and really kind of like deep in the weeds kind of professionally, but really digging into how the thing came about, what the kind of things in the way of publication were, what the event of publishing it like signified for the times in which it was published. I think as a genre of literature, I think you'd be really interested in it.
Yeah.
The Celebration of Discipline one just came out, Richard Foster was involved in it. Mimi, forget Mimi's last name, but she's a pastor in Denver, and she was kind of the principal writer on it. Um,
Okay. Of the
and
book
so
biography?
yeah, yeah. So if I mean you're kind of mapping out your own podcast series, obviously, but if that's a book that would interest you, I could put you in touch with Mimi
Yeah.
and Roy, and
Yeah. So are
that
Mimi and Roy the writers?
Mimi's the principal writer.
Okay.
Oh, like, did you just see a bunch of balloons float up?
No.
A bunch of balloons just
Oh, that's a
floated
Zoom
up.
thing. It's like this new. If you do.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. I want it to happen again. Um, okay.
But they're
But
basically the two writers of that book
yeah,
biography.
yeah, yeah. And so if
That'd be a
that
great one
interests you,
because
I
I could
can put you in
interview
touch.
them. We could just do a whole thing on the celebration of discipline. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's probably like a media packet for that, so you might get kind of the ball rolling. with the media packet. But
Yeah.
I'll put you in touch with them as well. So
Do you think it'd
yeah,
be yeah? It was Ann Voskamp and John. Who else?
John Blaze.
John Blades. Do you
Yeah.
think that that would be helpful to talk to them, or is that a little bit tangential?
John would be great because John was for a while, he was the editor in charge of Eugene's literary. So Eugene's literary estate is now kind of managed by, not his estate, but Waterbrook has kind of rights to the literary estate. And so John was Eugene's editor on his final book, which was a collection of sermons, and was kind of the first editor to kind of like dig into his literary estate. So John be good. Anne, I think, would be hard to pin down,
Yeah.
probably. She is a lover of the message, and she was a like happy participant in that
Yeah.
review process. But I think her focus is on other things at this point. So
Yeah. And who was
um,
the acquisitions editor? I know Rick was the agent. Who was the acquisitions editor at
I think
Nutcracker?
John Blaze functioned as the acquisitions editor,
So he
but it
was
might have been Don Simpson.
Don Simpson.
Or I'm sorry, not John Blaze, John Stein. So many Johns in the
Yeah.
mix.
So
Yeah, I
John
think John
Stein was
Stein
the
would
one
have
who wrote the
been.
letter, and he
Yeah,
probably acquired it. But then
yeah,
John
yeah.
John Blaze helped with some of the later his last book and stuff like that, and wrote
Right.
the
Right. And did the aesthetic revision. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you
I'll
connect with
send you.
me?
I'll like give you a cast of characters.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. And then I can kind of keep an economy of your efforts. But man, this has been really good. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. This is fun, man.
Yeah. So I'll stop the stream here.